Cyrus Brooks shares his unique journey from a background in mechanical and aerospace engineering to a career in the energy industry. He discusses his experiences in various countries, focusing on human rights advocacy and the importance of energy access in alleviating poverty. Cyrus emphasizes the interconnectedness of energy, economics, and social responsibility, advocating for a win-win approach that benefits both energy companies and local communities. He also highlights the role of his company, RBAC, in modeling energy markets and supporting economic growth. This is Energy Superheroes. Cyrus Brooks, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much.
So we talked a lot in the pre-show. You've got a really unique story, something that we normally don't hear. You traveled all over the world, did a lot of different roles, and then you joined the energy industry about 5 years ago. So I think you bring a very unique perspective to the podcast today. Tell us about your story.
I think my earlier beginning to the story, than 5 years ago is probably back, I mean, when I was in school, way back when I was good at mathematics, and so like most people, I didn't actually know what I wanted to do or where I wanted to go. I had so many interests. I guess I was interested in aerospace, so airplanes. So I actually did engineering, and so I went into mechanical and aerospace engineering at the University of California, Irvine. I grew up in LA, and then kind of near the end, there was actually unfortunately a downturn in the industry right when I graduated, and so it was just downsizing and everything. I was like, wow, this is terrible. And I looked at one of the jobs, and it was wow, it was for Rockwell, and it was the job title was modification of aircraft missile systems. And I thought, wow, that's so interesting. For a young man, that's like kind of very exciting, very. And I went to sleep that night, and I was thinking before I closed my eyes, I was thinking, do I really want to make better missiles? I mean, rockets, yes, maybe, but missiles? And I didn't think so. So anyway, I decided not to go that way. I decided I'm actually more of a people person. And I'm so engineering may or may not have been the right thing. I was good at math, so that made sense. But I just went full, I just, totally 180 degrees. I went off to Asia, and I started to do some volunteering and helping. And the first area I did was actually I kind of combined an interest in Japanese with an interest in people, and helped on a human rights campaign, which actually led me to Tokyo of all places. And so that was kind of an interesting, totally different than where I was going with engineering.
What a cool
And
story. I mean, so we get tons of people with mechanical engineering backgrounds, right, in the energy industry. So many, right? But their typical route is mechanical engineering, then they work for Exxon or somebody for a couple years, then they go back and get an MBA, and then maybe they go into finance, and they're
uh,
mostly live in the US, if anywhere else, maybe London. So I mean, your
right.
background is, I think, very unique and you're well traveled. Tell us some of the places you've been and just sort of that journey. And now that you're back in the energy industry, what perspective does that give you that may be different from just say your average person that's always been in the industry?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think when I went to Tokyo, and it was before, really, it was before even the internet was like just at the very dawn of the internet, as far as public facing internet and public participation. So there was websites, and there was your modem and your call up modem, and all this kind of stuff, and people. It was a new culture for me. So I remember, like, I was helping my group to get an internet site, and I had to go to, like, literally physically go to an internet service provider and meet them, just so that I could set this up. And I got off the train, and Tokyo doesn't have street names. Basically, an area name, and then you have a smaller area name, and then a building name, and then a building name, and you have then a unit name. And so the address, so you have to have a map near the station. right? Because you don't have a street name and you don't have like, you actually literally have to get to the right area, then get to the smaller area, then find the building, and then find the room in that building. I mean, it's a really fascinating system.
That is fascinating. I think that maybe our younger listeners don't fully appreciate the value of GPS. I mean, it's
Yeah,
just
yeah,
made life so
really.
much easier. I spent half
Exactly.
of my young adult life, I think, lost.
Yes, yes. And this was a great idea, a great kind of example of Japan. I got off the train and then a lady saw that I was a bit confused. She, I think partly because she was polite and partly because she maybe was a little afraid to try to explain it in English. She walked two blocks with me. I mean, I think it's very rare. You wouldn't see this in the US. Someone would say, "Yeah, I go down that road and go down," But she literally walked me all the way to the place to help get me there, and that was this culture, the politeness of Japan that we're so familiar with. Um, the work ethic of Japan is it's incredible. They work so hard. Like a friend of mine, because he was my roommate, and he was a human rights guy. He would work like 8 hours doing the human rights stuff, but it didn't give him enough money, so he then would, after his job, would work a second job to earn enough money, because he just believed in human rights so much that he did it as a job plus another job. Like
That's
dedic
incredible.
dedication was incredible. And after a year, so I went to Australia. So I ended up spending 17 years in Australia, and Australia is actually a bit of a regional hub for Asia and the Pacific Islands specifically. And so I got to see so many different cultures. It was fascinating. So I was helping with human rights, but in Australia, I did another thing is I did literacy, and I did drug education. So I started a foundation called Drug Free Ambassadors Australia. I got that going. It was already going as a group, but I got it registered and all the proper deals. So I learned about law. I learned about human rights and about the drug scene. It's amazing. I'm helping like little kids education on drugs. But I'll tell you one thing, drug users would come up to me, like they would literally make fun of me from a distance as a group, but individually walk one by one up and say, "You know what? I actually don't want to be on drugs." So this is one of the big lies of society is you get people who will try to, when people get into trouble, they'll try to normalize it. But actually, the truth is, situations like, drug use, a lot of these guys don't want to be on drugs, so normalizing it isn't actually helping them,
No,
so
and yeah, absolutely. And that's a huge problem in this country right now. I think it's just it was never this bad growing up, and it seems like now it's really bad. And maybe that's because of this normalization effort.
yeah, there is you know, I mean, I've it was kind of interesting. The thing is that one thing I learned, when I was there's obviously there's something important about your responsibility. Man, people put it on your head like hang it on your head like something negative, but this is the deal: is that responsibility is also, and if you look at it from the viewpoint of physics and science, we're talking about causation. Are you cause or are you effect? And what those guys were telling me, obviously, was that they wanted to be cause. They didn't want to be on drugs because they wanted to decide their own life. So recently, just a little excursion to talk to somebody on social media. They were lamenting that they were paid so poorly, and they was like they're saying, I'm a geologist and I got paid a certain amount, like I don't know, $300 for some little thing, something that I did, and the company got paid like 1,200 or something like this, and so they were lamenting, they were saying this was a terrible thing, and so forth. And it was kind of like so short-sighted, because if you realize that, wait a minute, yeah, but the company is, they have to promote. They have to pay promotion to get that sale, to get the client. They have to also pay. I mean, they have to pay for the receptionist. They have to pay for the booksman, the guy who gives you your paycheck. They have to do all these things. You know, how are those guys going to get paid if you get paid the entire amount? I mean, it's like a chef being if a chef cooks like a $40 steak or a $75 steak and he gets paid $75, how are you going to pay the waiter, the manager, the cleaner, the supply clerk, like, and plus the promotion, the rent, the utilities, all this kind of thing. Fortunately, you know, people kind of miss out the idea. They're thinking I'm a victim. They're thinking I'm a victim, I'm a victim, I'm a victim. But they got to see there's a point of responsibility. You got to be responsible not only for yourself, but you also have to see the greater picture there. And this is where people get into a trap. So when I was in Australia, so back to Australia, some interesting things. One is that there was a guy who was in Parliament who was an Aboriginal guy, and he was attacked so soundly, and what he said was he felt Aboriginal people should not accept welfare or any kind of, they call it the dole, government payments. He said basically cancel everything because he thought it was bad for the people, right? And I thought, wow, that's fascinating. I mean, the guy's really I mean, you don't say that, like, it's very politically incorrect. But what is he trying to do? He's trying to say, what we need as a group is we need to be able to be cause, not effect. You know, I mean, it's you don't want to have you want people to be affluent. You don't want people to get, to rise up. So this is the beginnings, you see, of what I started to see, how economics and later how economics and energy started to tie together. Um,
It's so cool that you got to see it at a human level in that way. And I
mm,
think, of course, energy has a huge effect on standard of living globally. So maybe talk a little to that and what you've seen in different places you've been in terms of energy poverty or countries needing, just the basics that we take for granted.
yes, well, I after Australia, I lived in a few places, but what you're talking about, this is my trip to South Africa. But I went from Australia. I lived in Korea for 6 years, and then I moved back to the U.S. I moved to Texas, Houston. I like Houston, and then I stayed in Mexico for a few months. I saw a little bit there, but I'll tell you mostly about South Africa. So I moved to South Africa as well for like 9 months, and wow, it was.
And what years was that approximately that you were
Yeah,
down there?
I was in South Africa in back in 2023, and so I already started working in the energy industry there, and so. And so what I saw was the immense level of poverty. Now this is South Africa in 2023, not 1995 or 1970 or 1948 when apartheid started. So apartheid ended in South Africa in 1995. Mandela was elected president, and people complain about lines at the polls. They haven't seen South Africa. The lines were like miles long, for people to vote in the first ever election that allowed all people to vote. But anyway, so you got like townships. You got people basically living in shacks, some metal roofing, siding, and four things held by rocks on top. And these guys have TV, and they'll tap or kind of steal, or you could say tap, or some electricity from a local wire. So they're not paying for anything, but it's like extremely dangerous, right? They got this, they'll get a little bit of electricity, and these guys will also they'll be cold parts. I was in Cape Town and a township called Langa, and I could see, even within the township, different levels of economics. And these guys who basically it was called an unauthorized dwelling. So it was just they just literally just set up a little shack, and not they didn't pay for anything. They basically just needed a place to live, and so they got one. And these guys, they had to. It would also get cold, you know. I mean, South Africa is at the near, you know, it's near the bottom, so it's going to be colder than the North, Middle Africa, Central Africa, or so forth. And so they would have a fire, and sometimes they would have a fire inside or whatever, and sometimes the fire would spread, and all of the shack houses and other houses sometimes would be gone. Like they would just wipe it out. All this had to do with energy. This had to do with you know, electricity. It had to do with keeping warm. It had to do with all these things. Extreme poverty, and so when you see that, you just see the importance of energy and energy access and so forth. But energy access, it's a bit of a funny word, though. You know, again, you want people to be caused. See, economics really, the important thing is you want to involve people in economics, right? Because it's not really viable to just basically just give people things for free, because the problem is nothing is ever free, right? Somebody's paying for it somewhere, and it's
Absolutely.
yeah. I mean, it's a wish. If you really look, like if you divided the wealth of Elon Musk and gave it to everybody on the planet, well, then everybody's going to get what, like a few dollars or a few $100. That's like a food for a week. And then
Right.
Elon Musk's help is gone. Like there's nothing else he could do. You know, if you take all the billionaires, then maybe we'd have a few weeks, or I don't know, a few months of food everybody would have, and then that wealth would be gone and there would be nothing left. So it's, you know, even the idea that the richest, like if just the richest paid, we'd all be fine. I mean, some people I think have this idea that it's just rich people making me poor. No, it's not what it is, you know. What it is that there is, you know, an area which is depressed economically, which actually simply needs to get active, and like you need to get production from that area so that it can have an exchange, and that exchange is real money. If you look at China 30 years ago, there was 85% poverty. I think some people don't realize that the story of energy, the story of poverty, the story of economics, it's all intertwined.
It
You
all
know,
ties together.
it
And
all ties together.
my first day in economics class, because I was an economics major, the
Oh, yeah,
professor wrote on the board the number one thing you have to know is there's no such thing as a free lunch. And right, so basically everywhere that applies in everything. And of course it applies to energy because the people think the power lines are just magic, but that power has to be generated somewhere. And that plant costs money, and building more of them costs more money. And I think that's what we're seeing now. We've been in a scenario for so long where we didn't need a lot more electricity in this country because we were benefiting from manufacturing going overseas and also from advances in energy efficiency. But that ship has sailed, and now we haven't built enough power plants and we're stuck because we need a lot for AI and we haven't really teed it up. So I think China has really surpassed us in terms of total electricity generation. And that's a challenge. I think that gap between us and China is probably the biggest challenge of our lifetime. We're going to need a moonshot, I think, to get there to be able to compete when it comes to AI. So it's interesting to see, but that was a little sidetrack back to South Africa. And so that you're in the energy industry, and we haven't talked at all about RBAC, which I think is an incredible story. Your father's company that he started back in the 70s continues to work there, and now you're helping with marketing at the company. So tell us how you progressed, say, from South Africa to where.
yeah. So you know, just to touch upon it, and you know, I think, you know, Bob, or my father, Robert Brooks, he's got a great story in it, you know, of his own. But just to touch upon it, you know, back in '75, he did his you know, doctoral thesis at MIT about energy. and that was really where things started. You know, it had to do with natural gas, and he told me this story. You can ask him this, but essentially he actually was interested in solar at the beginning. What occurred was, when you look at the practicality and of helping people with energy and what were the needs, it didn't quite fit. You know, it didn't quite work out. So the intention is there, and I think that's the same with a lot of the renewables. At the moment, I mean, we can't say forever, but even today. But anyway, so he actually followed up. I mean, he worked in many fields since then, but he came back to energy, started this company about 19. I think it was 1997 now, as RBAC, and developed a product, basically which basically modeled the entire natural gas market. You know, it was the beginning of deregulation
Just a small
and
thing,
so
right?
forth. Yeah, yeah, just a small thing, you know. But there was so many. It basically you took a quite vertically integrated industry, and when you unbundle all that, when you deregulate that, when you include a lot more people to increase competition, those people needed to figure out, well, how do we determine what's a good price? How do we determine where this gas should flow? And they never determined that over in New England, by the way.
They still
Thanks to
haven't
New
figured
York,
it out,
partly.
right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's right.
Save the planet and let's not burn gas, but I know, let's burn diesel and oil instead. That's a good idea.
Yeah, let's import gas from Russia because
Right.
New York won't let the pipeline go through New York,
Brilliant
I mean.
idea. You
So
got
anyway,
Pennsylvania next door is practically Saudi Arabia of gas, but we're gonna go get it from
yeah,
Russia. It's always fun.
exactly. So it's quite some incredible decisions there. And anyway, so this company is, and I was off, and so I was off in Japan, and Australia, and finding out. I was meeting people and cultures and understanding these things. I come back, um, and in 2021, I did some part-time work, and finally, with all my background, the company, like, I had not worked for a family company for and they said, "Why do you work for us?" I was like, okay, okay. So, I had a little hesitation because, a commitment to a company which has family members is, people can get a funny idea about that. You do have RBN, or Rusty Brazil, and those guys over at RBN Energy. I mean, there's plenty of companies that are started by people who are family because they maybe they know, they have energy experience and so forth. But so I brought something new to the company, all this experience with people, and my father had taught me something way back, which was about this idea of win-win versus the zero-sum game. He said, I mean, he did PhD at MIT. He knows about optimizing systems. And he said, look, you can actually have a system which can benefit the company and also benefit the customers. You can have a win-win situation if you set it up right. And then I had always thought, I was kind of like, had this idea that there was these big bad oil and gas people, especially oil. Oil was terrible. Oil was bad. That's what I had this idea for a long time.
I
I
think
mean,
that's pretty common among young people back then and more so today.
even more so today. I mean, there's some truth in it, whether, like, look, the practices of John D. Rockefeller and Standard Oil way back 100, more than 100 years ago. I mean, he did all sorts of things, but there was no laws at the time. They probably, because of what he did, there became laws, anti-competition laws. He would drop the price in one area, raise the price in another area, just but this area over here, the competitors would go bankrupt, and then he'd buy them. I mean, it was like he did all this stuff which was so terrible.
He helped us write all our antitrust laws, so we owe
Yeah,
him
yeah,
thanks,
that's
a
right.
bit of gratitude for that.
Yeah, he had a bit of a crazy idea that to control, like there shouldn't be chaos in the energy industry. That was probably the one correct idea that he had, but the way he did it was like was anyway, it made him rich, but I don't think it definitely had some negative effects all
It
around.
crushed the little guy, that's for sure.
That's right. And so I had that idea, basically at this, probably this example, I thought all this industry was kind of like that and so forth. But what I found was that the energy industry, I mean, it's no surprise, but I don't know why I didn't think this, but it's changed, like over, 170 years, like 1840s, the finding and discovering oil, and then, 1900s and so forth, really making a big deal of it with cars, and then realizing somewhere around then that natural gas was actually a good thing, not a bad byproduct, and they did, just instead of throwing it in the river like they were doing before. And besides, they were using whales, like the whale oil, which is like they're killing whales using the fat of those whales to create like oil and kerosene and this kind of thing. And so we stopped all that. We have natural gas now, and since, I mean, everything there's been all these disasters and different things, but things have gotten cleaner, things have gotten better, and that is the correct direction. And that's one thing the energy industry would be well to do, is to keep going in that direction. And they should not fight everything, but they should actually learn from these things. I think they are. I'm sure some people are trying not to improve something. I mean, or maybe to delay. Um, it's maybe that natural tendency, we don't want to let go of our profits and so forth, or they say, well, if Joe's not going to do it, then I'm not going to do it, and so forth. But yeah, I mean, you could say the energy industry, like probably all manufacturing, has cleaned up its act, right, over 170 years. And so it's, even since the catalytic converter, power plants, I mean, it's like 98% of reduction in all these emissions and pollution. So we don't see the smog. When I grew up in LA, it was full of smog. We don't see that to the same degree
The
as we
improvements
used
have been
to.
incredible, and I'll plug our country. I've done it before, but we've reduced GHGs more than any other nation, and we're the only that's decoupled our GDP from our GHG emissions, and that's primarily from moving from coal to natural gas in power generation. So that's been a huge advance, and one of the big reasons you don't see smog.
And coal itself, to be fair to well, it's still called king coal. I mean, the reason why it's so terrible overseas right now is that it's unabated. They're not like using clean coal to the degree that like we did, and we are. We have a lot. They're called scrubbers to get a lot of the
I
things
think
out of the
coal will
system.
be on a comeback now that we need more electricity. We're going to have to use clean coal technology, which was actually promoted heavily by Obama when he was in office. So I think it's a pretty mainstream idea that just we took a pause on for 15 years, unfortunately, but should come back to.
Yeah, I think that if we can actually use modern technology, AI, all sorts of things, we could actually make our filtering even better than before. Now, coal is a more complex and it has more particulates. And so there's coal ash and other things. There's a lot to do there. Natural gas, is preferable in that sense that,
For
you know,
sure.
essentially it's like
We should
carbon.
build all the gas plants we can build.
Yeah. I mean, carbon and four hydrogens. That's all you
Yeah.
have.
And especially
So,
since we're $3 or so MMBTU compared to 15, say, over in Japan. We
yeah,
can make it the cheapest and we can export it. I don't know too many commodities where we're 90% cheaper than the rest of the world. I mean, that's pretty astounding actually.
exactly. So, when I arrived, I mean, to kind of, I mean, I don't know, going back and forward in
That's
time.
okay. I think you play music. It's kind of like a song, right?
Right, right. Yeah. So, in a way, I mean, if we go back to, when I kind of decided to join this company, and RBAC, it creates a natural gas model for. It started way back in '97 on this creating a model of the entire North American natural gas network and
Incredible.
flows, prices, supply and demand, at all sorts of different places in within the system. So that's why I was just touching upon it. We can see actually, you can literally see, you can say, if you build a pipeline through New York to New England and supply gas to New England, the prices will go down, right? The prices, you'll get probably less greenhouse gas emissions by building the pipeline than not building it. And it would have been, and now it's going to be a lot more. I mean, imagine if they built it, 20 years ago. Like they've been talking about it for decades. If they had built it 20 years ago, the cost would have been rock bottom. Now we're talking about a lot higher cost to do the same thing they should have done before. But you can see that with the model. It's incredible. And what we've done with RBAC is that they model out from anywhere from a few months to 30 years in the future, and they basically calibrate backwards into the past 10 years to make sure that the model itself is actually matching what happened. So it actually has gotten better over 25 years, by going back and saying, okay, well, if in the model, back from 10 years ago, how well does that match to what actually occurred, which we now know? So it's not like a weather model. It is this is a model which is really can give value to not only energy companies, but regulators, I mean, even politicians, even in the environmental groups. If you wanted to really know the truth about what are the needs of energy and how to balance the environment and the energy needs of people, you could do that with this model.
No, that's cool. So you touched a little on some of the potential customers or customers of the model. It must be great. I noticed you guys have one for power generation too, which is where we focus heavily. So it's governments, it's companies, energy companies, it's probably traders that look at this a lot. Can you share, ballpark kind of how many customers that you guys or that come to you guys, or what are some of the types of customers you want to reach?
Well, we also deal with consultants. We deal with energy companies like midstream companies. Whether it's people such as Kinder Morgan or TransCanada, Enbridge, and these kind of things. We deal with vertically integrated companies like BP or Shell or Chevron and these guys. We deal with consultants, and so you have a lot of consulting companies will also use our model. So there we can do analytics, but we're trying to enable other companies to do their own analytics. And if they're a small company, then they can lean on us to do the analytics. And we've done a lot of projects together. So we've dealt with the Department of Energy, the Railroad Commission over in Texas. A lot of state and federal organizations. We deal with FERC, and so forth. The whole idea here is that you want something that you can have a trustworthy, robust model, which also you can see it's transparent as far as the inputs. It's not like there's a black box where someone will tell you the result, but they won't tell you how they got it. And so we offer that to all these guys, and that way they can compare to what other people are saying and so
I
forth,
mean,
and
that's
that
just
really
a
helps.
who's who of customer list. So hats off to, you and your dad and the whole company for being around that long and, have stood the test of time because there aren't too many companies that have been around since the 70s, I don't think, in that sector.
Yeah, and if you go back to the very dawn of energy itself, the word comes from Greek energy, which means work. It means work and activity. And so, if you want to tie all this together, this is where my heart lays. Having been to Mexico City, having been to South Africa, seeing depressed areas in Australia, New Zealand, the Philippines, like absolute poverty. All of these things, but even depressed areas in Los Angeles. in Houston. You know,
Unfortunately, that's increasingly the case.
yeah,
It's an indictment, I think, of our culture at this point, but I think maybe we're headed in the right direction now.
right. You see, if energy means activity, it also kind of gives you a clue of what you would need to do to actually unlock those economically depressed areas. You see, energy has to do with activity. Activity has to do with economics. If you want to raise the finances, basically the standard of living of people, and not only in like Southeast Asia or Southern Africa or some other place over there, but actually in our own backyard, some of the depressed areas. What we need to do is we need to get more economic activity in those areas, you see, and that has to be fueled by energy, right? And
Energy,
so
which
all
is work.
which is work, so basic physics. So if you tie your basic physics and engineering to your economics, you see, and then add some compassion, you see, you could really entirely change an area, and companies really thought in that manner. If you had big energy companies, if you really want to, make a public relations splash, if you want to, be the good guy in the picture, they're always trying to paint energy companies as the bad guy. If you want to be the good guy, the best thing you could really do is bring energy to areas in a way that allows increased economic activity. If you do that, then the local area is going to rise up. You're going to have more people, right, who are actually involved, and then you also help with school and education to get people the idea that, hey, the solution is that we are involved in this economy. If we're involved in this economy, then we can rise ourselves up out of wherever we are. And that is where I see my role in energy. Is in the greater picture, we are assisting a better energy future for America, for North America, for the globe. That's what I say.
That is pretty cool. I want to actually end on that note because I'd love to have you back on with your dad to talk about RBAC in more detail, but I think from a big picture standpoint, there's no better goal than what you just said, which is I think if you could unite energy companies around impacting low income communities, I think that is a true win-win situation. So good stuff. Cyrus, tell the audience how they can get in touch with you and RBAC.
Well, you can contact me at rbac.com / contact, and you can find out more about us. You can definitely find me on LinkedIn or social media. I'd love to talk to people, to anybody. I'm also, I just like to help people. I do a lot of volunteer work as well. So, if any of the things I mentioned sounds good to you, I'd be glad to help in those other areas as well.
Very good. This has been Cyrus Brooks. Thanks for being on Energy Superheroes.
Thanks for having me.